Hello everyone, my name is Naveen Rai and today we have Adithya Kashyap with us who recently wrote the SAT exam and we learn from his experience. How did he prepare and get a massive score of 1510? So welcome Adithya. Please begin with your introduction.
Yeah. Hi guys. So my name is Adithya Kashyap. I study at APL Global School in Chennai, and yeah, I just recently happened to write the SAT. I got a 1510, but I've got a super score of 1550. So don't tell anybody the 1510 score. Yeah. So yeah, I'm currently in my 12th grade right now, and I'm planning to do political sciences and economics at school. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with my score. It just came out today.
Congratulations Adithya. So you mentioned super score of 1550. So that
Yeah.
implies that you've written the SAT exam before. So how was the experience earlier? How much was the score before and how did you transition from that score to this score?
Yeah, so this was my second attempt. I had written it once in December, meaning that I had written the paper-based test once, and this time around in May, I wrote the digital SAT. So it was quite the experience. I wrote in two different formats, and it was certainly difficult for me to adjust initially. So my first attempt, I happened to get 1490, and the highlight of that score was I got a full score in maths. But unfortunately, my English score was not quite up to par. But this time around, I tried to really up my English score, and I'm happy to say I got a 750 in English. So yeah, I certainly do think it's a quite a vastly different experience doing it on paper based and doing it online. But with some amount of practice, I think people can very much get a good score.
Absolutely. So those who are watching would definitely want to know that what all resources did you use in course of your preparation. So can you list out the resources that you used while preparing for the SAT during the earlier attempt and this one?
Yeah, so I think for me it's important to start for my December attempts preparation because I feel like even though it's everyone would say that the changes are pretty vast in terms of like some of the syllabus content and even the way in which it's structured, I do think there are many parallels which you can draw between the paper-based SAT and the digital one. So for the paper-based SAT, my preparation was relatively simple. I did a lot of questions and answers on Khan Academy, which I think is a very helpful resource. I also happen to use the Hello Study Global whatever resources were available over here. Those are also very helpful. But I think the biggest advantage with the paper-based test was the fact that you had past papers to work with. Now, anybody who had done the SAT prior to 2023 would know that that was a huge plus because currently, if you do the digital SAT, you don't have those kind of options. You don't have the opportunity to do past papers. But with the old SAT format, what you would do is every time a new SAT came out and the scores have been released, some people would also release the actual SAT test which came out, and that would be available for all of us to attempt, and that gave us a really good idea of how the SAT would actually be because we all do the tests on Khan Academy, we've all done the tests on Blue Book, but in our mind we're also a little bit unsure of whether we'll actually get a similar score. Well, when you actually do past papers, that's pretty much what you're doing. You're doing an actual SAT test, and you have a really good idea, and that fills you with confidence. Whereas this time around, that was not there. I would definitely say there's a scarcity of resources for the digital SAT. It's unfortunate, but I'm hoping that they'll start adding more resources. I expect them to do that in the future, and who knows, maybe more organizations will also come up with useful resources for students. So yeah.
Absolutely. And Aditya, you mentioned that there was a difference in the difficulty level also you felt in certain sections. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that's another thing about the digital SAT. So I'm someone who always likes to do a lot of practice before my exams because otherwise I don't feel very confident before going if I don't do like 50 papers. I'm just that type of person. So I had a really good idea of how to gauge. I was able to really gauge the difficulty levels of the old format SAT and the new one. And I can definitely say two things. The first thing is that the English, which used to be a two sections, one was a writing section, one was a reading section. Now that there's now a sort of a combined reading and writing session on the online test, I feel like they have simplified it a little bit. They have made it a little bit easier for students. I was always someone who slightly struggled in the reading section because the skills which were tested over there they were relatively demanding. This time around, with the one paragraph option of they just test you with one paragraph and they ask you for the main ideas of the text. It's certainly a bit easier for someone like me who always I had a problem over there. But the maths, on the other hand, well, you could say it's remained the same in terms of questions and real difficulty. What you will understand and sort of realize once you actually get into the test hall is that the hardest questions which will come in your test. So for instance, right now it's in a module system where you get the first module, they just try and see how much you get. If you get a 20 on 22, then they'll give you a harder module. In the harder module, you will often get questions which were much harder than the old paper-based SAT. And that was a big shock to me because we only had four blue book tests to work with, four official tests. So we didn't really have any real way of gauging how it would be in the actual exam, and I felt it was quite a step up. So I feel like people should sort of now focus a little bit more on maths because you never know what's going to come on the test. So yeah, that's what I would say was my observation.
Right, you right in saying that the moment you do first set, really well, the second set naturally would have more difficult
Yeah,
questions. So, because the test has become adaptive in nature, so one would feel a little bit of heat in the second set, right? So,
yeah.
perfect. Yes, and now speaking of the time management, did you kind of feel the same heat when you did earlier while preparing for the paper-based test? The verbal sections used to be, the lengthy passages used to be there in reading comprehension, five lengthy passages. Now, comparing with that, how did the time management play out for you this time?
Yeah, so I think in terms of time management, I always feel like it's something very subjective, person to person. I feel like for me, it's always been that I always need to do a lot of practice before I go into the test because time management is something which I feel you can only really develop after you do many attempts on your own. And for me, I personally felt that the time management on the old SAT, especially the reading section, you wouldn't find too many students who said that they found it very easy, especially in terms of time management because back then you had four or five texts to read from and you had to really almost remember every single detail. They could ask you a question for anything, so you would have to keep flipping back and forth, and that was torturous to really do during the exam. Nobody I know who wrote the test with me actually had a pleasant experience with the reading section. So thankfully this time around, since the everything is a bit more streamlined, with and the questions I feel aren't as demanding. You can certainly have a lot more time to do all of your answers. I think you get about a minute and a half roughly for every question. And if you take a minute for each question in the English section, I think you'll be fine. But again, I think like what I mentioned before, it slightly differs for maths now because the maths questions are harder, and I feel like they also require you to do more calculations. So if anybody is doing the digital SAT from now on, you should definitely start getting better at doing calculations because of course that's what the SAT tests you. It's time management. So that's what I would say was the difference over here.
I'm sure you must have done really well in the first set of 22 questions in maths, and that's why the second
Yeah.
set became, more of advanced questions were there. Now, there's one more thing. The calculator has been introduced in both the math
Yeah.
sections. So, how helpful do you think that is compared to what earlier was the format in which you had one calculator-based section, one non-calculator-based section?
Personally, I didn't actually use the calculator in the exam. I'm used to in my maths exams at school. since I study at a CI Cambridge school, we only get to use the normal calculators, not the graphical ones. Um, College Board has introduced, they've collaborated with Desmos, the graphing calculator app, and they have that, they have a particular, like a small calculator which basically has the graphing abilities. So I did see people using it during the exam, but I'm personally not very comfortable using it, and I don't think it's necessary for you to have it. I don't think, because number one, the content hasn't really changed. They're not testing you with different topics in maths, and even before, you never really needed to graph out anything. But of course, I think for people who are used to it and who may be unsure for certain questions, especially if it's a particular graph, like a quadratic graph or probably a cubic graph, if they feel a bit unsure, then it's definitely a useful feature. But personally, I did not use it. But yeah.
So, Aditya, how did Hello Study Global help you in your preparation journey?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, I think at the start when I was doing the paper-based SAT, I attempted to do it on my own. I tried to prepare on my own, but I was feeling like a little bit of a, I was feeling a bit lost at some point, especially for English. I do feel that oftentimes for students the hardest part is English, because even though they may be proficient with the language and stuff, they may not be used to the format of how the SAT tests it. And I think, it's always good to learn from experienced individuals. And you, Naveen, sir, you definitely helped me in that aspect. So, constantly getting me onto a routine in terms of doing my Khan Academy practice or doing the Hello Study Global tests and doing the past papers. That rigor really got me into a really good headspace heading into the exam. So so that's how I feel Hello Study Global helped me. In terms of the digital SAT, I think the Hello Study Global tests which are available as well, they're almost like for like in terms of the format. And that's again very helpful, because there are only 4 tests offered by College Board right now, which it's very disappointing for me. I feel like they should be doing a lot more for the students. Yeah, but in that aspect, I feel like Hello Study Global has done whatever it could. So I'm very happy.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Now, last piece of advice that you'd like to give to the students who are going to write exam in the forthcoming months.
Yeah, so for the students who are planning to write the exam, I first would like to tell you, don't panic about the lack of resources. I think that's something I initially did. I kept complaining to all of my friends, oh no, how can they only have 4 tests? Because I was so used to the paper-based test. It's a real, it's like a shifted mindset almost. Especially if you've done the paper-based test, it's horrid if you're actually planning to do the digital SAT. But we're in the digital format for the long run, so we're going to have to adapt. So I think the first thing would be, take a test and just see where you're at, because if you've never done the SAT before and you're planning to do it, take a test, see where you stand. It doesn't really matter how much you get, because I think only by taking a test you'll actually know what the SAT has in store for you. That's the first thing I would say. The next thing is, I still do hold the belief that Khan Academy is a very, very useful resource. Prior to this, like a few months ago, they weren't really having much to offer. But now I think they have some interesting things. Like, for example, they've added this new thing called a course challenge. And that's where they add 30 questions for you, and you can do 30 questions all at once. And Khan Academy is, the very good thing about it is that since it's endorsed by College Board, the questions will be very similar to what you'll get in the actual exam. So 30 questions which are very similar to what you get in exam, I think it's a real win. So I recommend that all of you guys do all the Khan Academy exercises, do all of the unit tests, do all the course challenges. That will definitely get you into a good frame of mind. And in terms of time management, like what Naveen sir said, I think that's a really important thing which people need to get before they go write the exam, because you'll often see people doing the last 5 minutes, they'll have like 10 questions left. You never want it to be like that for you, because you want to check your answers, because it's time management is essential if you want to do well on the SAT. So yeah, I think yeah, do a lot of practice. come in with a calm mind, and time management has to be good, and I think you'll be good on test day. So yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful. So I'm sure those who are watching this interview, it is going to be a lot of it is going to be very insightful with the pointers that you gave, and especially relating with your experience of the exam date, the challenges you faced and how you overcame those challenges. So thank you so much, Aditya, for joining
Thank you.
in, and it was wonderful having you. And those who were watching us can subscribe to our channel to stay updated with more such content moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.